Welcome to today's math lesson on graphical representations of linear equations. Our do now reads, which table contains only corresponding x values and y values, where the value of y is 1 less than the quotient of x and 2. And so our important words are less than the quotient. And so quotient is telling us that we need to divide x and 2. So if we were to write an equation, it would look like x over 2. And then since it says is 1 less than, we know that we have to subtract 1. And then when it says y is, that means is equal to y. So our equation is x over 2 minus 1 is equal to y. Now what we have to do is plug in all of the x values from the table into this equation to see which one gives the correct y value. As you can see, all of the x values in the tables are the same. They're 5, 12, 15, and 20. So we're going to start with 5. If we did 5 divided by 2 minus 1, 5 divided by 2 is 2.5, and then if we subtract 1 from that, we get 1.5. So looking at the different tables, over here it says when x is 5, y is 2. That's not correct. B says when x is 5, y is 2.5. That's also not correct. C is saying that when x is 5, y is 3.5. That's not correct. And D is saying when x is 5, y is 1.5, which is our only correct answer. And if we continue to plug in the different x values, we'll see that the y values should be correct. So 12 divided by 2 is 6. 6 minus 1 is 5. Then we have 15 divided by 2 is 7.5. 7.5 minus 1 is 6.5. And lastly, we have 20 divided by 2, which is 10. 10 minus 1 is 9. Today's TEK is 8.5i, and our lesson target is that scholars will write equations in the form y is equal to mx plus b to model a linear relationship using graphical representations. And then our DOL is given 4 problems. Scholars will write equations in the form y is equal to mx plus b to model a linear relationship using graphical representations with 100% accuracy. Our academic vocabulary words include constant rate of change. So when we're talking about proportional relationships, our constant rate of change is represented by the letter K. And if we're talking about for non-proportional relationships, our constant rate of change is going to be represented by M, which is also called the slope. And there's 2 types of linear equations that we've learned about. We have y is equal to k times x. And then we also have y is equal to mx plus b. And this specific equation, or this form, is called slope-intercept form. Nonlinear relationships, when you graph it, will not make a straight line. X coordinates always come first in a point. So we have x, and then y coordinates come second, x comma y. And our y-intercept in this slope-intercept form can be identified with the letter b, or we're going to replace b with the actual y-intercept number. This first I do reads, let's examine how to write an equation based on a situation that models a linear relationship. It says a video club charges a one-time membership fee plus a rental fee for each DVD borrowed. So if we didn't have this graph and we had to write an equation given this verbal statement, one-time membership fee should tell you that that is representative of our y-intercept or our b value. And then the rental fee, because it says for each DVD borrowed, our keyword is each, tells us that the rental fee is going to be our slope. In this case, we are given a graph, so we can just look at the graph to write our equation. Our first step is going to be to identify our y-intercept from the graph. So our y-intercept is the point at which our line crosses the y-axis, and our y-axis is our vertical up and down line. So this is our x-axis, and this is our y-axis. And so our y-intercept is going to be positive 8. And then to find our slope, we have to choose 2 points. There's 2 ways to do this. We can either choose 2 points and count how many units or how much we're going up and down and left and right, or we can find the 2 points, write out the coordinates, and then subtract. So to solve it both ways, this is 1 point. I'm going to say that this right here is our second point. And so I have to figure out what my change in y over my change in x is. From here to here, if this is 16, I know that this must be 18 for this to be 20. So each box represents 2. So from 8 to 18, that's a change of 10. And since we're going up, it's going to be positive 10. And then we have to figure out how many units we're going to the right. So from here to here, if this right here represents 0 and this right here represents 8, the difference between 8 and 0 is 8. So we have 10 over 8. What we can do is we can either divide 10 divided by 8, or we can simplify this fraction. So to do that, I'm going to list out the multiples, or the factors, of 10. So the two numbers that multiply together to make 10 are 5 times 2. And then the two numbers that multiply together to make 8 are 4 times 2. And their common factor is the 2, so I'm going to cross that out. So that means that 10 over 8 can be simplified to 5 over 4. We can also divide 5 divided by 4, and that gives us 1.25. If you had divided 10 divided by 8, that would have also given you 1.25. So now we can combine this information of the y-intercept and the slope to write our equation in slope-intercept form. So our equation has to be in y is equal to mx plus b form. So we can either write our slope as a fraction in reduced form, in simplest form, or we can write it as the decimal. So our equation can look like y is equal to 5 over 4x plus 8, or it can look like y is equal to 1.25x plus 8. Lastly, we can also switch around the slope and the y-intercept, so we can have our y-intercept come first. So it would be y is equal to 8 plus 5 over 4x. So all these equations that we just wrote are equivalent to each other, equivalent meaning that they're all equal to each other, or they have the same, they'll get you the same answer if you plug in the x. It'll give you the same y value. This we do question reads, the graph represents a scuba diver's ascent through the ocean to reach his boat. Write an equation in slope-intercept form that represents the diver's depth over time. Ascent means to come up. So in this situation, the diver is starting below sea level, underwater basically, and he's swimming back up to where his boat is. So first we have to find the y-intercept. How do we find the y-intercept? Well, we identify the point at which the line crosses the y-axis. So if this is our x-axis, this flat horizontal line, our y-axis is the vertical line, the up and down line. And as you can see, our y-intercept is going to be negative. And if this is -4 and this is -8, I see that each box has to represent 2. And so this would be 0, -2, -4, -6, -8. And this y-intercept would be at -10. Next, I have to identify another point to find our slope from. And so in the first I do, we found our slope graphically. Now I'm going to find our slope by finding the coordinates of the 2 points. So this right here is not a good point. This right here is not a good point because it's not at the intersection of the grid, the intersection being where the 2 lines of the grid meet. This is not a good point. 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 This is a good point right here. So the coordinate of this y-intercept is 0, -10. Y-intercepts will always have an x coordinate of 0. And then the coordinate of this point right here, which is our x-intercept, because it's the point at which the line crosses the x-axis, is 80, 0. So from here, we're going to use our slope formula. So we have m is equal to y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. We're going to have to label the 2 points. So I'm going to say that 0 is x1, negative 10 is y1. Then I'm going to say that 80 is x2. I'm going to say that 0 is y2. We're going to plug in the numbers into this equation. So y2 is 0 minus y1, which is negative 10, over x2, which is 80, minus x1, which is 0. So when we have two negatives right next to each other, it becomes a positive, or we just turn it to addition. So 0 plus 10 is 10. And then we have 80 minus 0, which is 80. An easy way to simplify numbers with 0 to the right of it is to cross them out. So 10 over 80 becomes 1 over 8. And so we know that our slope is 1 over 8. And now we have to combine this information to write our equation. So our equation is going to be y is equal to, we have 1 over 8x plus negative 10. We can even omit or take out the plus and just have it as y is equal to 1 over 8x minus 10. And then also we can switch around our slope and our y-intercept. So it becomes y is equal to negative 10 plus 1 over 8x. There were several you-do problems to do. And then finally, we're at our DOL. So click on this link down here to complete your 4-question Google Form DOL. Thank you so much for following along in today's lesson, and see you in the next math video.